Without further ado, this is the release webinar for HAPI 7.0.0, a major release increment, which is exciting. Smile CDR 2024-02-R01. We have codenamed this release the Apollo release. We have finally made it the entire way through the alphabet and looped back to A, which is, I kind of can't believe we've gotten there, but there we go. 27th name release, I suppose. And this is our release webinar for that release. So, as always, we will be talking through today things that are new in our HAPI FHIR and Smile product families, which I'm really excited to do. We'll also be joined a little bit later by Bryn Rhodes, who'll be talking about what's coming up and what's been added in the clinical reasoning product family. So I am very excited for that as well. So, with no further ado, let's get into it. We have decided this year we're going to go with a bit of a space theme. I mean, anyone who paid attention to our first 26 named releases will probably notice that we didn't really have much in the way of themes. We like animals around here, so we often picked animal names. We picked place names a few times. We picked random words a few times, depending on what seemed interesting. We decided to give it some structure this year, so we're going with a space theme. So this release is the Apollo release. A couple of facts about Apollo, and I have to say, every time we do this, I've said this before, I always end up learning a few things about whatever the word is that I didn't know before. I can't say I knew a ton about the Apollo project beyond the real basics before getting into the research for these slides. But there we go. There were 14 missions, 14 missions in the Apollo missions. Obviously, Apollo 11 is the most famous of those. That was the mission that initially brought humans to the moon. A thing that I didn't know until recently. Probably lots of people listening knew this and think I'm crazy for not, but there we go. I had no idea that 12 different astronauts had walked on the moon over the course of the Apollo program. There were a number of missions, and apparently we just kept going back to the moon for a while. That's kind of interesting to know. Apollo, of course, named after the Greek god for the sun and is associated with the bow and music divination, youth and healing. So there we go. A few things about the word Apollo that I had no idea about beyond it being a mission that brought humans to the moon. That's fun. As always, we have included a release playlist. This playlist is curated by the developers who brought the product to you. We're always excited to bring this to you. Kind of a fun one this time around. I guess I usually say this, and it always is, but these playlists are really all over the map. Clearly, we've got developers into all kinds of different music, so some real gold in this. I won't give any feedback about what I think is the best songs in there, but there's some real good ones in there. So let's get into what features are new in the product this time around. We're going to start with something, I don't know, boring and yet exciting at the same time. Maybe we can say it that way. I always hate explaining features where we have put a ton of development effort into that thing. And really, all we've done is make infrastructure improvements that don't necessarily bring any new capabilities to the platform. This first change is exactly that, unfortunately. I've spoken about the Jakarta changes over the course of the last two release webinars. For anyone who maybe hasn't been following along or didn't see those webinars, the quick recap of the situation is that a set of API changes were thrust upon the Java development community, specifically renaming of a bunch of APIs called the JavaX APIs to a new namespace called Jakarta. I won't get into exactly what that means here. I've posted plenty of links about the meaning of it, but the bottom line is anyone who is developing against these APIs, and that certainly includes all of our products, HAPI FHIR, Smile, the clinical reasoning suite, all of these suites use these legacy APIs, and we're therefore sort of forced to make a bunch of infrastructure changes to adapt to the new APIs, or at least we're forced to decide whether they wanted to make that change. We polled the community, and the community told us it was very important that we make those changes. Unfortunately, making those changes was literally thousands of person hours. It has taken us an astonishing amount of effort. You know, that shouldn't say thousands, that should say hundreds. I am probably overstating it a little bit, but it really did take a massive amount of work, basically beginning back in June 2023, when I first started talking about this, and the community initially decided that this is the direction they wanted us to go. What does this mean for our users? I will say for Smile CDR users, likely you're not affected by this change. It is sort of internal to the framework. if you develop custom interceptors or hybrid providers that explicitly use the JavaX APIs, then you will be affected. You'll have to migrate. I know we do have customers that are in that camp, but I think the majority of customers, including the majority of customers who develop their own interceptors and hybrid providers, probably aren't affected by this. Um, we largely wrap those APIs in other APIs anyhow in HAPI, so that's likely not going to affect you. For anyone who's using HAPI/FHIR embedded, in other words, using resource providers, and especially if you're using the JPA server, you will likely have at least some rework to your code to deal with these new APIs. We do have a page up on our documentation that talks about migration to the new Jakarta APIs, so there is help there available if you need help to make these changes. As I say, there we go. There's the upgrade guide. An interesting thing about this is that a number of frameworks that are sort of central to our platform that we take advantage of have made this same API change in the last year, in some cases in the last 2 years. Them making that change meant that we couldn't upgrade until we made the same change. So we've actually, as a part of the HAPI/FHIR 7 and the Smile CDR 2024-02 release, upgraded a number of core components, including Spring, Spring Boot, Hibernate, Hibernate Search, and Jetty. I'm excited about this, frankly. Hibernate, in particular, is a very significant improvement between their 5.x line and their 6.x line. They've made performance enhancements, they've made functional enhancements, they've made changes to the way that they access specific database features. There is all kinds of goodness in this new release that everyone who takes advantage of either of our platforms will get to reap the benefits of. So lots of infrastructure. I can't point to any concrete new functionality you'll get, but there's a whole lot of goodness that comes from all of this. One, I guess, originally unintended consequence of this change, and kind of important to draw attention to, is that with this change and with sort of minimal JDK versions required by a number of our dependencies, we've been sort of forced to rethink our minimum JDK version for deployment. So I will say specifically, if you are a Smile CDR user, you will now be required to use a minimum of Java JDK 17. We now do support Java JDK 21 as well. Those are the two currently active long-term support versions anyhow, so that seems like a wise decision to move to those. We've found incredible performance gains in some high bandwidth scenarios using the modern JDKs anyhow compared to older versions. Just memory management keeps getting better in Java. So even if we weren't forcing it, I would still recommend you upgrade to that version. Previously, we required a minimum of JDK 11. HAPI/FHIR, we have held back to JDK 11, so nothing has changed for HAPI/FHIR users today. We are, I will say though, planning to upgrade that in the future. I think a likely timeline for that is that at some point this summer, perhaps the August timeline, we will upgrade HAPI/FHIR to require a minimum of JDK 17 as well. We're holding that back because we do know of a number of users with specific scenarios. An example of that being the Android platform that is just rolling out support for JDK 17 right now. But we do recognize that lots of people, including HAPI/FHIR users, want to take advantage of modern JDK functions. So we are going to do our best to stay relatively modern. I do love that this is a trend in the Java world these days. Any developers of HAPI/FHIR, in other words, if you are compiling the HAPI/FHIR framework itself, not just coding against it, but developing new features right within HAPI, we do require Java 17 for that now. That change was kind of forced on us, of all things, by the Derby database. The modern Derby database requires Java 17, and it's required to build HAPI. So there we go. That forced us to move forward. The final thing I'm going to say about Jakarta, before getting off of this slide, is I'm going to show you a picture. And I always love when life throws weird little ironies at you. One of the little ironies that life threw at me in the last 6 months is that a whole bunch of the work that I personally did to move this Jakarta API change set forward was done on a plane where I was headed to Jakarta, the city. So this is a photo of me sitting in my airplane seat with a map showing where I was going and HAPI/FHIR in the foreground on my laptop. So gotta love when that kind of thing happens. That was a little surreal when I realized exactly what was going on. Good times. I will say, as an aside there, I never actually realized until I visited Jakarta how much of the Java ecosystem is named after things in basically in Indonesia, around Java the island and Jakarta the city. So it's kind of interesting. You see a whole bunch of familiar names around that part of the world that various parts of the Java ecosystem are named after. That's kind of neat. So moving on from Jakarta, I am so happy to be done talking about Jakarta. It's been 3 releases and I'm just sick of thinking about it. So I'm happy about that. We've made a bunch of other changes. On the configuration front, we have recently added a really interesting new piece of functionality to our cluster manager within Smile CDR. Specifically, we now store, save, and restore points anytime you make changes to configuration. So in other words, it is now possible to roll back configuration changes to a previously, presumably known good state if you make changes you don't like. I will say currently that functionality is only available through an API, but we do also have plans to add a UI in an upcoming release so that you'll be able to, look at changes over time and roll them back as you see fit. I think that's going to be very exciting for people who are developing new things. On the Camel and HL7v2 front, a bunch of interesting changes there. We have added the ability for Camel routes to make contributions to the Smile CDR transaction log. This, it may not seem intuitively obvious why that's interesting, but anyone who is building a modern HIE interaction, in other words, if you're building health information exchange infrastructure on Smile's platform and taking advantage of the Camel routing capabilities to do that, and I would say we have a number of projects going where exactly that is being done. I love this platform as a data fabric for health information exchange. The ability for you to create custom transaction logs is a super useful thing if you want good visibility into the orchestration of your HIE transactions. On the HL7v2 front, we have added the ability for any custom mapping code that you add to automatically import concept translation services that allow you to do mappings using arbitrary concept maps or even built-in concept maps that we supply. You can sort of manually apply any translations you want. We've also modified our MLLP listener, which is the old HL7v2 listener, so that if it fails to start because it is having trouble binding its port, it will now keep retrying until it manages, or at least it'll retry a few times before it gives up. Should be useful. The FHIR gateway. This is another one which, increasingly as we move to big distributed FHIR architectures, people building proper data fabrics that are FHIR enabling their organizations, having a gateway which is fully compliant and aware of your FHIR functionality, always a good thing. On our gateway, we've added a few interesting features this release. Specifically, if you perform read operations through the gateway, it will now cache any responses it gets from target servers. At least it can be configured to do so, and it will use those cached responses in order to avoid hammering your target server if the same request comes in multiple times. Previously, searches work this way, so FHIR reads do as well, and this can be really useful if you're trying to achieve high scalability for specific kinds of servers. We've also added the ability for FHIR transaction operations to happen through the gateway, and we now actually support, this is kind of an interesting one, we support searching against targets that are incorrectly returning individual resources instead of proper search bundles for their search responses. So in other words, the gateway often can be a thing which helps you cover over issues with target servers that you don't control, and that was exactly the use case for this feature. In the world of security, for our smart outbound security module, we have added the ability for you to add scopes through authorization scripts. So in other words, if you want a client authorization to have an approved scope, even if that scope wasn't requested by the client, you can now do that through authorization scripts. And there's all kinds of interesting use cases for that. It's also possible now for you to add custom claims to the access token. Recalling that our access tokens generated in Smile are perfectly valid and digitally signed JOTs, JWTs. You can now add additional claims to those JWTs as you see fit. In the world of Megascale, we continue to work on Megascale, continue to add features there, and frankly, continue to see interesting customer adoption of Megascale as a technology to achieve really large-scale FHIR repositories. We now support fully partitioned subscriptions within Megascale. So what that means is it is now possible for you to have subscription resources and topic resources for that matter that live on individual partitions within a Megascale database and that apply only to data within that partition. That was not previously possible. Now it is, so that's exciting. The world of terminology, always and validation for that matter, always one of those kind of annoying to deal with, but things you have to do if you're building large infrastructure. The validate operation now includes a couple of extra extensions in its response that will give you programmatic access to the line number, the line column, and a code indicating what the issue was, which is great if you want any kind of machine processability for your validation outcomes. Again, a thing that we're seeing increasingly as customers move to big distributed architectures. We've also improved the way that we do coding display name validation so that A, you can turn it off if you don't want it. Previously, that wasn't an option. And B, if you leave it enabled and you get an error, the error is now quite a bit more helpful than what it used to be. It gives you the expected value and that kind of thing. So that is definitely helpful if you're trying to diagnose why things aren't validating properly. Another interesting one, we've now really tweaked the behavior for value set expansion, specifically the filters for descendant of and is a filtering logic. Those are used, of course, when you're trying to do value set expansion on code systems with hierarchies. Many code systems have hierarchies. I will say this one is interesting to me specifically because it was a community contribution. So, of course, thank you very much for that contribution. We've also added what we call the terminology troubleshooting log. That's been added both to HAPI and to Smile CDR. And the terminology troubleshooting log is a log that will give you visibility if you turn it on to the internals of the terminology stack, which can be incredibly helpful if you're trying to figure out why your terminology validation isn't working the way that you would expect it. A number of enhancements on the performance front, and these, again, apply both to HAPI and Smile. We have made a pretty significant modification to the way that we store raw FHIR resources in the database. We've had two options for a long time. One that uses a compressed binary version of the storage in a, that should say blob, not clob, actually, in a binary blob. And the other where we just use a standard database varchar text column to store the raw text. We have migrated all platforms other than Oracle to only ever use the text column going forward. This doesn't abandon old data. Old data will still be available, but any new data stored in the system, and for that matter, any data that has a reindex applied to it, will now be migrated out of the database blob and into the text column. We made that change because modern benchmarking, this didn't used to be the case. Things, of course, move quickly in the database world as well. We have found that recent benchmarks show that this is just plain more performant to do it this way on all platforms except for Oracle. Oracle's support for blobs and clobs is slightly different than the other platforms, so we do not see the same performance enhancement. And there's a couple of other reasons we haven't made that change as well on Oracle. So there we go. We have added a new index design for Postgres databases that should significantly speed up string searches. So this is, for example, a search for patient by last name will perform significantly faster on this release. If you have a Postgres database that has any collation mode other than UTF-8, and the default in Postgres is C. So this, I'm definitely not going to get into the specifics of how Postgres collation modes work here. They are a fascinating topic, but let's just say if you use string searches on Postgres, there's a good chance you're going to see a nice performance improvement with this release. The trigger subscription operation, which can be used to replay subscriptions, in other words, run historical data through the subscription processing engine as though it was new. That operation now works in a multi-threaded way, which gives a huge performance enhancement in some scenarios if you're triggering large amounts of data and have lots of CPU cores to throw at that problem, which is great. We've also added an internal resource streaming API. There's a bunch of infrastructure changes that went into our storage layer around streaming of resource IDs coming out of searches. I won't highlight that here because it's a pretty structural improvement, but functionally what that means is that two operations, specifically our reindex operation and our MDM clear operation, are much faster as a result of that change. And that's obviously a pretty good thing. On the HAPI security front, we have now got the ability to completely and fully authorize patient type level export, a bulk export, the $ export operations. Previously, it wasn't possible to combine our authorization interceptor with that specific operation. So the way that we do security on those is actually quite a bit better in this release. We've also made a few changes that prevented any partitioned servers from having a number of different batch jobs completing successfully. So lots of improvements to partitioning in this release as well. A couple of little miscellaneous HAPI things I will mention. We've added a new client point cut. So if you're developing FHIR clients. We've got a new point cut that lets you access and modify the server response. We've added support for payload content types to topic subscriptions. There's two here, ID only and empty. I'll give a little quick preview. There is a third, which we don't currently support, which a community member has just contributed support for. That's going to come in our 7.2 release. And the trigger subscription operation now completely works on partitioned servers, which is exciting as well. We are really excited within this release, changing gears a little bit, to announce the emergence and the first sort of initial release of a new module we're calling CDA Exchange Plus. We have historically had a module called CDA Exchange in Smile. This is a ground up rewrite of that module. Brand new logic, brand new extension points, brand new functionality, a completely different approach for handling CDA Exchange. We've got a diagram up on the screen here, which sort of shows the flow that we've got. There is all kinds of extensibility built into this platform. I am really, really excited to be sort of announcing that this is coming into the platform. We have a lot of work to do still on this platform. It actually does remain sort of hidden behind a feature flag within the Smile platform. But if you are interested in being an early adopter of the Smile CDA Exchange module, we would love to hear from you. We are absolutely very actively working on final stabilization, and I am quite positive we're going to be talking a whole bunch more about CDA Exchange in our May release, which is, of course, in 3 months' time. So there we go. MDM, the team on our MDM product continue to make improvements to that platform, and all kinds of great stuff is coming forward with MDM. I'm going to talk about two different facets of MDM today. First off, the MDM UI component, which we have added. On the MDM UI, we have added now support for managing practitioner resource linking. Traditionally, of course, the MDM UI supported only patient resource linking. We have now added support for practitioners, so that gets you to the two sort of definitions of letter P and the word EMPI. You can use MDM for both of those capabilities. And we continue to think about how we might use the MDM UI for linking of things other than patients and practitioners as well, because of course that is a key design goal of our MDM platform. So I'm sure we'll be talking more about that in the future as well. We've also added the ability for you to look at metrics around the MDM platform through that UI, which is exciting. And we have done a ton of work on sort of improved UI UX for the MDM UI. And specifically this time, we've got a really nice new screen for side by side comparison views. I got a preview of that the other day, and I have to say it looks really, really slick. So exciting times for anyone putting out MDM infrastructure on Smile. Within the core engine in Smile and HAPI we now fully support FHIR R5 repositories for MDM, which is exciting. I will say, as an aside here, we have not seen a ton of customer demand for FHIR R5. I've fielded this question a few times in the last while. We've had people asking us, how is R5 adoption going? And certainly from our seat here at the helm of HAPI and Smile CDR, I would say it is much slower than FHIR R4 adoption was. But some people are using FHIR R5, that much is true, and MDM now supports it. We've also added a couple of new warnings, which should help people who are trying to figure out what's going on with their MDM platform internally. On the P2P, the payer-to-payer front, we are now calling payer-to-payer data exchange the system-to-system data exchange. As I'm sure everyone who's following this kind of thing is aware, in January of this year, CMS released the final rule with dates around all kinds of things. There are enforcement dates for various things and final rules about how to implement various things. And the system-to-system exchange is one of those things. System exchange is defined mostly in the DaVinci Payer Data Exchange IG, which is often referred to as PDEX. We've been using that as one of the blueprints for this platform that we're putting together. In this release, we've made a whole bunch of updates so that we can support the side of the exchange, which is sharing data. We call that often the source payer. And in a future release, certainly probably in the next release or two, we will be adding support for the receiving side of that data exchange as well. So all kinds of good things coming in there. We've basically finalized the member match operations so that it supports the final version of the PDEX specification, and that includes consent handling. We've got all kinds of enhancements to our authorization server so that we properly support the member match operation and the exports that go with it, and that all of the exports are secured appropriately as they're defined or as their scope is outlined by the member match operation. That little bit. I mean, it's a mouthful to say. I cannot tell you how difficult it is to get all of that stuff syncing correctly. So it works now. I know it's been a lot of work for the team, and congratulate them on that. And of course, we've made a bunch of enhancements to the $ export operation as well, because the PDEX profile puts quite a bit of onus on that workhorse to get things right. So that's been an exciting little while. AppSphere, our AppSphere platform, I actually don't even know that it got a mention in our last release webinar. And of course, I definitely want to remind people, we still love AppSphere as a module. We still continue to work on it. One of the things that we've done in the last quarter is to run an additional set of security tests on AppSphere. Specifically, we did our own internal vulnerability assessment. We also continue to do external vulnerability or penetration tests against the platform. And that applies to all of our platforms, but of course, including the AppSphere platform. The recent round basically uncovered a number of things that were recommendations that we fixed. So we've addressed all of those. Those things include addressing an XSS vulnerability. So that's great. That's been addressed in AppSphere. And we've also upgraded, of course, to Angular 15, which brings just a whole host of new new fixes and security enhancements to it. So lots of good stuff comes from that. I am now going to invite Bryn Rhodes to join me so he can talk to us about what's new in the world of clinical reasoning. Welcome, Bryn.
Thank you, James. I'm excited to be here and talk about what we've been working on with clinical reasoning. So the team has been hard at work fixing issues and enhancing the quality measure capability of clinical reasoning. So first one to talk about is performance improvements. So there's some improved performance that now enables practitioner group members to be completed up to 6 times faster. So significant performance improvement there. Practitioner groups is another aspect now. So evaluate measure can be run on practitioner groups, where previously you had to use a series of single practitioner queries. So that's especially important if you're running on multi-provider and multi-facility. Also added the reporter element to measure report. So this allows you to better attribute which organization is reporting when you're reporting for multiple organizations. So our customers often report and submit quality reports on behalf of many practices. And this more clearly attributes which measure report is associated with which practice. And finally, we added support for the APP reporting option. So the quality payment program clinicians in the US participate in with CMS currently has MIPS and APM program tracks. We're adding support for the APP reporting type. That's significant for ACOs. That's the reporting option we need to use they need to use because that web interface is being sunsetted. It's also important because that web interface allows a much smaller sample size. So using this APP is you're going to start needing to aggregate data from multiple sources in order to do that submission appropriately. So that's just a summary of the high level. There's also a host of fixes and support for updated CQF stack. We're keeping the clinical reasoning module capabilities within HAPI and Smile CDR up to date with the latest clinical quality framework stacks that run CQR. So that's the summary.
There we go. Thank you very much, Bryn. A couple of other little things I will mention. Our team will, of course, be at HIMSS this year. HIMSS is back in Orlando this year. If you ever want to see a giant convention center, if you haven't been to the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, man, it's staggering amount of concrete went into that building. I've never seen anything like it. So come visit us. We would love to talk to you if you can find us. It's a big place. If you can't find us, we're at booth 3507. And of course, we will be at Vive again this year, which is in sunny LA. So if that's more your thing, come visit us at Vive as well. We would love to talk to you. We've got a couple of webinars coming up that I will mention. Specifically, we are running a second Zen webinar. The Zen webinar, if you didn't attend our previous one, this is a new thing that we've done one of, and this is the second time we do it. This will be a webinar that focuses it focuses on our recent releases, but has a bit more of a business and strategic focus as opposed to the technical focus of this webinar. So if you're interested in that, we would absolutely love to have you. The last one went amazingly well. We'd love to have you at the next one. And there we go. We've also got an upcoming webinar that we're calling, and I love this name, the Care Gaps Crystal Ball. So that's coming up as well. Join us in February and join us in March. We would love that. We've got a couple of other webinars coming up as well that we don't mention on these slides, but we'll be sending out announcements about those as well. So lots to come. And finally, as always, join us in the various places you can find us. We'd love to talk to you. We've decided we're going to highlight instead of Smiles Twitter, we're now highlighting Smiles LinkedIn. So join us on Smiles LinkedIn. I really have to say, I'm not just saying this, our team does a phenomenal job of curating content for our LinkedIn. It really is a good source, even if I have to admit, I don't personally have a LinkedIn. I do still follow what we post there, and there's good stuff there. So there we go. And with that, I would love to invite Megan Pete, our incredible MC for the day, up to the stage. Hello, Megan.
Hello again. I'm always excited for a new release. I'm glad to be back. This is where we are going to open things up for Q&A. We don't have any active questions in the chat, but we are watching the chat. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them up and I will happily read them out for you. Just as a quick preview, because I know James can't see them. We've got compliments on our HAPI raccoon, which is an excellent raccoon as always, as well as some images that took me a minute, but we're Apollo because of, the bow and arrow and the sun. But thankfully, we've got questions coming in. So this is coming from Chuthime. I'm sorry, it's one word, so I'm not entirely sure how that name breaks up. But it's just a question about payer-to-payer. Is that on the roadmap? Are there any production uses of it right now?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I'm happy to field that. Thank you for asking. So the deal with payer-to-payer. So payer-to-payer, of course, was announced in what we assumed was going to be its final form a few years ago. I guess it would have been 3-ish years ago it was announced. We did develop a solution to the initial payer-to-payer, and that was what was called the member-mediated exchange, which was the original paradigm for doing payer-to-payer exchange. Pardon me, the member mediated exchange was kind of an interesting flow. It was a fairly simple flow for us to implement, and we did build a system that supported it. Unfortunately, I guess just broader community sort of feedback back to CMS was that the member mediated approach just really didn't work for a number of organizations and vendors. So it has since been abandoned. There is a new sort of approach that is called the member directed exchange, which is, frankly, a much more difficult exchange to implement. It's a lot more complicated. The flows are a lot more complicated, but it is it's just a whole order of magnitude more flexible. And I think understanding the complexity of the human world and the payer world, that's really that flexibility is probably critical to successful adoption. So, the answer to your actual question is yes. Payer-to-payer system, the member-directed exchange is absolutely on the roadmap. We're now calling it the system-to-system exchange. That sort of is I think a better term than member-directed anyhow. We did have a slide in this webinar sort of announcing that we have got in this release of the product support for the sending payer in the payer-to-payer exchange. In an upcoming release, we'll be adding support for the receiving payer as well. So yes, absolutely on the roadmap. In terms of production use, I would say no, I don't believe anyone is using that in production yet. The enforcement date listed in the final regulations actually doesn't require payer-to-payer to be live until 2017. So we do have a bit of time before that needs to happen. Of course, we are talking every day with various payer customers about how they can start testing this module so they can be prepared for that enforcement date well before the date. So I expect we'll see production use starting to scale out in the coming months and years.
Just a quick clarification. By 2017, you meant 2027, right? We're not time traveling.
Thank you. Yes. I
Okay.
promise I know what year it is.
I don't, so you're doing better than I am. Just to follow up with that, you talked about it a little bit there, just the CMS rule. Now we've got the final actual dates. How is that affecting some of the plans for SMILE going forward in the roadmap from maybe a higher level than just P2P and some of the other projects?
Oh, I love that. I would say the reason I'm excited about having, having this final rule out and having, enforcement dates and standards picked and all of that good stuff is that this really gives us our marching orders here at Smile. Our vision entirely is to be a suite that we don't just do compliance. That is obviously only one of the reasons you would choose to adopt a data fabric, and of course you get all kinds of other benefits from adopting it well beyond just compliance. But we do intend to be your one-stop shop for compliance. I mean, this really gives us our marching orders. It tells us we need to focus on finishing off P2P. We need to get our entire prior auth suite up. We need to focus on all of the other regulations, on anything that's coming. Bottom line here, this sort of gives us dates to march towards and tells us exactly what we need to do for those dates. The thing that I definitely want to make sure is clear here. We are absolutely planning and intending, and I know we're going to get there. We are going to be the one-stop shop for all things CMS compliance. We have got teams working on solutions for everything that payers need to stand up. So if you're looking for a place to do that, we'd be happy to be that solution for you. I guess that's the bottom line to that.
Excellent. And I guess now that everything's more stable, instead of guessing in flux, like with the member mediated, I'm so glad we're changing the names. That'll help drive the roadmap a lot. And we've also got a quick correction or supplement from a user called Egg, just saying the P&P enforcement date is in fact 2027, January 1st, not 2017. So everyone can put their time machines away. We've got one more question. I think this is for James, and if no more come in, I'm going to steal some of Bryn's time. I'm really looking forward to it. Just asking a question from our friends down to under, because I know we do a lot of work with people in Australia. They're looking at using IPS, which I believe stands for International Patient Summary, for transfer of care between countries. Their question is, what is the best way to consume IPS, and how should that data be imported?
Ooh, there's a fun question. I swear that the question is not a plant. It absolutely is not. It gives me an awesome opportunity to talk about the way that I think is best for exchanging IPS documents. So the IPS world, the International Patient Summary community that exists within the FHIR community, have really been gelling around an additional standard, or at least an additional specification called the Smart Health Link standard, which is effectively this really interesting mechanism that allows you to stand up QR codes that create these little QR codes that give a system, an automated and standards-based way of accessing the data for that IPS. I don't have nearly enough time to get into all of the nuance of Smart Health Links. They are a really interesting technology, but I will say two things about them as key takeaways about Smart Health Links. And I know I'm going to be talking about them a bunch more at the next release webinar. I'm quite certain of that. Thing one that I will mention is that Smart Health Link, the Smart Health Link standard, is quite neat, or I really have to call it specification. It is not yet a standard. They're quite interesting in that they give you a data link that, if you've got an EMR that is aware of what they are and can import the data, then awesome, they will do exactly that. But they also have this really nice graceful fallback where they can bounce the user over to a web-based viewer to look at that data. And what's great about that is that you can show one of these QR codes to anyone with if they've got a tablet or even a phone with a camera. They can absolutely scan these things and look at the clinical data that's within them. They don't have to have an EMR. And of course, if they have an EMR that supports them, all the better. They will automatically import that data. So I think that's really neat. It's really quite a clever little specification. The other thing I will mention is that we are actively adding support for Smart Health Links. So I'm going to not say any more about that because that's going to come in our next release webinar in May, but stay tuned for May because we are absolutely going to be announcing some awesome functionality around Smart Health Links and their ability to scale out IPS. We've also got a pretty significant infrastructure change to the IPS generator that has just been committed. So there's a bunch of neat stuff coming for our next release around that world.
Excellent. I know we talked about it a lot last release, and it'll be upcoming. So there's just a little bit of a break here, but Ken's making sure it's still on our minds, which it definitely is. we don't have any more questions in the chat, please feel free to type anything up in there. I will bring them forward, but I am going to pick on Bryn for a little bit because James has been doing a lot of talking. We just at the end of our presentation talked about some events that we were attending, but Bryn, I know you're really not invested. You're a very big participant in Connectathons. You had one recently, right? Was there anything like exciting that happened at recent Connectathons? You are on mute.
All right. Yeah, the most recent Connectathon. I mean, the Connectathon is a huge event, which is fantastic. There's like 40 tracks, tons going on, and it's really hard to keep track of everything. I'll note that if you do want to go get a kind of a sense for what happened, you can always look at the report outs. They're detailed descriptions of what each track achieved, and those are linked from the Connectathon page. So if you're interested in more, that's there. But I could give the perspective from just the clinical reasoning track, where we had a lot going on. One of the main purposes of that track is to test the quality measure specifications, so the quality measure implementation guide and the data exchange for quality measures. We've been, over the past several years, been steadily increasing the amount of content that's available. And this time around, we had 52 measures that have been authored in the a FHIR-based measure authoring environment that is being developed. They were exported from that environment and imported into basically FHIR implementation guides using Visual Studio Code plugins to actually run the tests. That represented some 690 value sets that those measures make use of, and there were some 3,600 tests that are associated with those measures. So each measure comes with unit tests that validate all the functionality and make sure there's 100% coverage of all the criteria in the measures. So that was really exciting for me to see that there's that much content available for testing. We've also been doing in that track a lot of work on terminology specifications, making sure that when you release a set of measures like that, or any artifacts really, that all depend on a huge number of value sets, that you have a consistent way to get expansions from correct versions of code systems and value set versions. There's a lot of dependencies there, and making sure that the expansions that an implementer gets when they run that measure are the same as the expansions that were used to test that measure is a really important aspect of making sure that all happens correctly. And we have now, again, over the past several years, been developing a Postman collection of tests against any terminology service that makes sure that if you have that content loaded, you're able to correctly expand and access all of the value set content. So there's some almost 700 tests in that Postman collection that the Value Set Authority Center, a terminology server in the US for supporting quality measure implementation, is successfully passing about 70% of those tests, which I think is a big milestone. So I'm super excited about that. We also have been working a bunch on measure repositories. So in the same way that you can get terminology from a FHIR server, you can get knowledge artifacts, measures, your profiles, questionnaires. So building a specification to make it possible for knowledge artifacts to be an ecosystem, just like terminology is. And we are seeing several implementations of that, and MITRE brought a whole new prototype reference implementation of that. So if you're interested in that, that's open source and available as well. So yeah, lots going on, and very excited. That's all from the clinical reasoning perspective. I'm sure there was tons going on in other tracks as well. It's a really fun and exciting event. So I encourage you to participate.
That's really cool. I always love hearing about like how much community support there is, especially in like spaces like with the connect-a-thons. And then you're like, oh, this was a big blob of like all the stuff you're doing. And then it was just for clinical reasoning. Like it's just a small glimpse at like the massive amount of community. That's really cool. I know we don't highlight connect-a-thons as often on these webinars, but it's something that, you know, Smile and folks like you and sometimes James are very active in. We do have more questions in the chat. I am so sorry. I did miss one when I said we had no more questions, but I have been corrected. My thing was not scrolling on me. But the first one is about prior auth. So it's probably for James, which is which major EHR vendors is your prior auth solution integrated with in hospitals?
Ooh, that's a fun question. I have to be honest with you. I do not have that information at the tip of my fingers. I know that our PA team. I mean, they've been attending every Connectathon that comes, and they do all kinds of EHR testing. They've worked with. I know the names of several vendors they've worked with. I just don't know if that's a thing I'm allowed to say. So unfortunately, I'm going to say that we do work with a bunch of vendors. I don't know that I can give an answer to that question on this webinar. Why don't I promise, though, that we'll take that back as something that we should probably talk about at a future webinar. We are actively working on prior auth. We have yet to release anything from that project, in a state where it shows up in this webinar. When we do that, I am certain we will talk about the testing we've done with various vendors.
All right, thank you. So it's a stay tuned for more kind of thing, but not a full answer today. We've got Ken as well coming back with more international patient summary questions. If you're using it for transfer of care, what are your thoughts on how the target system should import IPS data into a local FHIR repository? He does go on to explain that by local FHIR repository, he's referencing the FHIR repository in the target jurisdiction where the patient is going to be receiving care.
That's a fun question. I guess, IPS documents, assuming your IPS is expressed in FHIR, then what you've got ultimately is a FHIR document, the FHIR document paradigm. And FHIR documents, of course, are a great big bundle where the very first resource in that bundle is a composition, which acts as effectively the table of contents to the document. It defines the structure, defines the sections. It actually contains the human readable narrative version of it as well. Your second resource is typically your patient resource. And if it's not second, it's definitely in there somewhere that sort of tells you who the patient is, the subject of the document. And then everything that follows that is a whole bunch of clinical content. In an IPS, you've probably got a bunch of condition resources, a bunch of allergy and tolerance resources, a bunch of observation resources, so on and so forth, just a bunch of good content. When you're processing documents, and this, ultimately, when you're processing documents, you've always got some hard decisions to make. This is not IPS specific. This is actually it applies to IPS. It's just as much a real world problem that we're facing today on various HIE projects. You've got a decision to make. Do you decompose the bundle? Do you take the individual resources and store them as top order resources in your repository? Or do you just store the bundle itself as a top order resource, or you do both? Or do you do both? Those are kind of your options. I will say, clearly there's not a right answer to that question, and there's lots of schools of thought. I think, if I'm doing this, absent any other context, which often would help for answering a question like this, but absent sort of anything else, my personal view is that you certainly do want to uplift your patient resource if it doesn't already exist in the system. And if it does, you may well want to do some identifier matching just to make sure that you've got linkages so that your document can be found when you do searches of things belonging to the existing patient resource in your system. I think typically for the use case, the scenario, basically the scenarios where an IPS would be relevant, it probably does make sense to keep the bundle composed. In other words, not decompose it into its constituent parts. One of the things about the document paradigm in general that I think is important to recognize is that a document is always intended to be a snapshot at any given time. If I've got an IPS about James the patient, and it says that James has a condition of whatever, broken leg or something, that doesn't mean that James is going to have a broken leg forever. It just means that we're asserting that as being a condition that James had at the moment the document was valid. Broken leg is probably not a great example of a condition, but there we go. Point being, you really do want to treat these things as point in time summaries, and you do want to look at them cohesively as such, as opposed to sort of treating them as these ongoing and dynamic live living documents. There are, interestingly, the Smart Health Link standard does actually have provisions in it for an IPS to actually be a living document that is going to change over time. I don't know that I'm aware of any implementations that take advantage of that functionality yet, and I have no idea how you would import such a thing into a repository. That seems even harder. So that doesn't really help this question at all. But it is an interesting thing to think about that's coming. Bottom line, I guess, really to get to the heart of this question, I mean, I would say treat your IPS as a document just like any other document, and decompose it if you've got specific use cases for it. An obvious use case for decomposition is if you want to use your document contents to feed or to fulfill CQL expressions. I mean, let's say we're going to run care gaps against our clinical data, and we want the well-structured data coming from an IPS document to feed that. Decomposing it might be a good solution to that. But if your use case is providing better care by showing the data to users, probably keeping it intact is the best option. I guess that's the best answer I could give to that.
All right, thank you. We can't escape the IPS in these webinars, but we'll look forward to as these use cases develop more, and we can figure out how we do or do not need to support certain things. Just switching back, because you talked about care gaps, we've got Bryn here, so want to make use of that. Bryn, what are some of the plans for supporting newer specifications, not necessarily IPS specifically, but using the CQL IQ?
So one of the things that in the specifications that we've been working on, quality measures, clinical guidelines, the specifications that really provide the framework and basis for a lot of the functionality in the clinical reasoning space, is kind of making sure that all of the different places that talk about how to use CQL have a consistent and consistent base specification. So we refactored some of that content into a new using CQL IG that validated this cycle. And we are hoping to get to publication of that relatively soon. And so we're excited about having, one, it's a place for, so you don't have to take dependencies on some of these other implementation guides to get that functionality. If you want just the CQL evaluate operation, for example, you can take a dependency on just the CQL, the using CQL IG. And it's also really giving us a space to work out what are some subtle nuanced differences between the way that the different specifications were handling things. So we're excited about that, and that work is being, it'll be published this quarter, and we're working on incorporating that into the reference implementations, the CQF stack. So yeah, excited about that.
I'm always excited about upcoming changes in this space. That's really cool. I have one more question for you, Bryn, which is, when is the ruler going to be retired?
So that's a good question. So we want to balance the support that we have throughout the community for the capabilities that the ruler provides. So if you're not familiar with it, the ruler is a HAPI extension that supports clinical reasoning capability. And we've been working over the past several years really to try to align better with the HAPI architecture and ultimately get all of the functionality that CQF ruler was providing plugged into the base HAPI server, so that you don't need this separate ruler. You just, it out of the box works with the HAPI server installation. Last round, we got the JPA server to a place where it fully supports that. We've been enhancing the plugin architecture for adding providers and operation capability, and making sure that we're using consistent interfaces between the HAPI implementation and the clinical quality language, clinical quality framework implementations, so that we can just use the components of the CQF stack in the HAPI server. So that plugin architecture is evolving and improving, and each release it gets a little better, and a little more of that functionality comes into play. So we don't have a hard date at this point, but it's coming soon, and this as soon as we can. So.
All righty, thank you very much. We don't have any more questions in the chat, but it seems like there's lots to look forward to going forward. But there's also lots of great stuff in this release. Thank you guys so much, both James and Bryn, for just coming on and speaking and dealing with all of my questions, as well as thank you to everyone in the chat for providing me with questions that I can pester these two with, and as well to like everyone who's worked on this release. It's a wild amount of work and coordination that goes into these things, even just doing these webinars and stuff like that. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to go listen to the release playlist. I look forward to it every year, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you so much.